Hi guys, welcome back to Contest Prep University. I'm Joe Klemczewski with Adam Atkinson. We're going to continue on 3 or 4 more episodes in our series on contest day management. And we're going to kind of round out today, Adam, the series on carbs, no carbs, what if I'm too flat, too full, spilling over. We're going to finish with what if I just can't get a pump? What if I'm doing push-ups, doing some laterals, curls, and nothing is happening in the muscle tissue, no vascularity, no movement at all. What would your first move be?
Yeah, when I hear no vascularity, water is going to be a huge culprit for that because that's going to make up a large amount of your blood volume. And then I would probably, just in case, add some sodium in that regard too. That's going to really help pull water into the muscle tissue and help that person get a pump. It's pretty much impossible to get a pump without water or sodium.
Right. And I remember, if I go back to 15, 20 years ago when I first started coaching clients, I may have won the majority of my 400 to 500 pro cards with clients just because of being able to specifically know exactly what's happening in their bodies and make the right moves at the right time. So you've mentioned this a couple times, not even waiting until it's time to start warming up to test those waters, have somebody, answer questions like, do you feel full? Do you feel flat? Lift up your shirt. Do you see any vascularity? What's the skin like on your forearms? Do you feel really tight, or is it soft and squishy? Because you can get some early symptoms of dehydration and start to rectify that even before that time. But I agree. If somebody's backstage and nothing is going on, I'm going to initially assume water. But I also, again, need to look at that context. When was their last meal? Is there a chance they could respond to just a little bit extra carbohydrate in the form of sugar? We've talked about a couple times even using alcohol, which I know is one of those weird myth type things, like that's going to magically give you a great pump up. But if you've got a pretty empty stomach and you're getting enough water, sometimes that alcohol, because it's a great sugar, is helpful. So I've seen people do some wine or some shots back there. But food-wise, are you pushing more food into somebody if you think they really need it?
I usually won't, and here's why. If it's that scenario, you can have the GI tract just so full of food that the water is being used more for digestion than it is actually getting into the muscle tissue. And that's obviously a really big problem because it's just hard to get that water past that point. So I might even be more careful on food and just be more aggressive with water, making sure that's passing through and getting to the muscle tissue versus being bound up for digestion instead.
I'm very, very glad you answered that way because you're exactly right. You've probably got an entire bolus of food still in your stomach from your previous actual meal. Then if you've done any food for a pre-pump up, and sometimes it's gonna vary what you and I use. I may use some rice cakes. I may use a candy bar, half a candy bar. Sometimes people with small appetites and they just don't need as much carbohydrate, could be a very simple sugar. I've seen people use jelly beans and Skittles and those kind of more fat-free, high sugar candy sources or sugar sources. I know some people still love to do honey. That's kind of an old school 50s, 60s thing. But anything to get a small amount of glucose if you really need that. Otherwise, I agree with you, Adam, that it's primarily going to be water and sodium at that point, and sometimes to be very aggressive. But what about pumping up too much or too hard? Maybe it's hot and they're sweating. Are you monitoring for those factors?
Yeah, because they can pump themselves to potential spillover at that point. And that's where some more salt can come in to just help them reabsorb, some of that water into the muscle tissue and just redirect everything. So that's the biggest thing for people to listen to is you're just directing where these fluids are going based on what you're giving people. And that can make a huge impact on how they look.
And exactly. Great point about you can pump yourself right away from being pumped up, meaning you're using so much glycogen. If you're frantically trying to feel some fullness, if you're making the mistake of just working harder, doing more sets, you're likely going to contribute to the opposite, where now you're wasting any amount of glycogen you still had in the muscle tissue. So I would say, and I know we covered this in a previous episode, just slow down. The job is to get warmed up. The job is to start getting fluid into the muscle tissue, because you're going to be on stage pumping and posing that way. So, all right, guys, thank you for watching, listening. This one, we're going to turn a little bit in this series towards some very nuanced topics on what you might deal with on contest day that you need a quick fix for. So stay tuned.